Hello everyone, welcome back. We move into the next topic. What we are going to do now is we are going to finish off all the small topics, and once we are done with all the small topics, then we will dive into the bigger topics. So another very small topic called aggregate planning. What do you mean by aggregate planning? Well, the word aggregate literally means when a lot of small parts are brought together to create a whole. Like for example, building a building, construction. So you bring cement, you bring concrete, you bring gravel, you bring bricks, you bring wood, you bring steel, you bring iron, you bring everything together, these different parts together, and create a building. And that's nothing else but different parts aggregating together to become something big. And that is what the word aggregate literally means. How are we going to use it, or what does it mean for us? Let's go back. Let's go back to the topics that we've done. I wanted to manufacture shoes. I understood that I need to do a little bit of a scientific study, a statistical study, which I did. I got data. I analyzed the data and I realized that if I'm going to make shoes, I will need to make at least 10,000 units of shoes, or let's say at least 12,000 units of shoes. After I realized that, I started checking where should I put my plant. So that is where location planning came in. After I planned the location and I decided on the location, I came to the next bit, and that is a facility plan. So whatever facility I was going to put up my plant in, I started to analyze and I started to create a layout for the facility that is the best, which reduces the interdepartmental travel. After doing that, we now come into aggregate planning. Now, what do you mean by aggregate planning? Well, when you did forecasting, what did forecasting tell you? Well, forecast gave me a prediction into the future. So let's say that you are a shoe manufacturer, and depending on your previous data, I gave you a forecast that you will sell 1200 units in the next year. So I have to sell 1200 units throughout the year. Or let's say you are an umbrella manufacturer, or you are a rainwear manufacturer, or you are a cold climate wear or a warm cloth manufacturer. If I tell you that in the next year you are going to sell 1200 units, fine. 1200 units in the year is 1200 divided by 12 per month. Because when I start producing, I will start producing in a monthly fashion. That in this month, this is what I'm going to produce. In this month, this is what I'm going to produce. 1200 divided by 12 is roughly 100 units per month. What does that mean? What it means is that roughly my sales will be 100 units per month. Let me change the example. You are a wedding planner. You have planned a certain number of weddings in the past few years. And now, depending on that pattern, your forecasting manager tells you that in the next year, you will do a total of 120 weddings. So this is my forecasted demand or my forecasted sales in the next year. What do you mean by 120 weddings per year? Can I say when you say 120 weddings per year, it is 120 divided by 12 weddings per month, which is roughly 10 weddings per month. What does that mean? What it means is that every year you will end up doing, or you will end up managing 10 weddings every month. Okay. So suppose in this month you do 10 weddings. In the next month, there are only 2 weddings. Or let's say in the next month, there are 12 weddings. What will you say? Sorry, no. I have decided only 10 weddings every month. I am not doing more than 10 weddings. Fine, you don't have the manpower, you are not doing more than 10 weddings. Because that is what your plan was. Your plan was only 10 weddings a month. So you have manpower, you have material only and only for 10 weddings. Fine, no problem. Let's go into the next year, next month. So January 10 weddings, February 12, but then you said I can't do the other 2 weddings. So I only take orders for 10. Okay. March 8 weddings. Why? Well, March is not really a wedding season. Now in India, when is there a wedding season? Well, there are 2 wedding seasons in India. Number 1 is December and number 2 is May. These are the 2 wedding seasons in India per se. So people mostly get married either in December or they get married in May. Not that they don't get married throughout the year. There are other people who get married through the year also. But most of the people or most of the weddings happen in the December or the May bracket. Where I come from is Kolhapur, is mostly we have weddings or any functions, we try to keep them in the April-May bracket, because then students have, like your cousins, kids have a holiday and then everybody is available. So it becomes easier for people to attend. But then if there is somebody who doesn't want anybody in the wedding, he or she will make sure that it is sometime in the peak period where work is going on in full swing and it is not even on a weekend. So nobody can attend. Fantastic. But yeah, coming back to my situation. So you did 10 weddings in January. Fantastic. That is what you planned. There were 12 orders in February, but you said no, only I will do 10. Now there are only 8 weddings or 8 orders in the month of March. But what have you decided? 10 weddings per month. So what will you do? You will go stand in the road and you will see anyone. You will say, excuse me, can you come here please? Are you married? If you are not, then I am short of 2 weddings. Can you just get married because I am short of 2 weddings? Does it work that way? No, it doesn't. This 120 is throughout the year. This 10 is per month on an average or approximately. Are you going to have exactly 10 weddings every month? No. There will be months where there are less than 10. There will be months where there are more than 10. On an average, I will have 10 weddings per month. So there might be a month where there are only 8 weddings and there might be a month where there are 12 weddings, and it will nullify each other and balance it out. Whenever there is a demand that is created, this demand fluctuates due to multiplicity of reasons or due to multiple reasons. When I did forecasting, I told you the 4 main reasons why there will be a fluctuation. The first reason is there a season? If there is a season, demand will be high. If there is no season, demand will be low. Wedding season is in December and in May. In December and in May, there is high season. So there is high demand. Off season, there is low demand. Question number 2. What cycle is your organization in? Is your organization in the positive cycle where you are doing very well? Or is your organization in the negative cycle? Then your demand will keep falling. Question number 3. Is there any irregular variation right now? A very good example of the irregular variation, the pandemic. See, seasons create fluctuations, but seasons tell you and they come. So you know that in India the rainy season is in a certain time. You know that in India the wedding season is in a particular time. But corona or a flood doesn't tell you and come. So you cannot make plans for it. And because of that, the demand drops. It's not always that a pandemic creates a bad influence on everything. Like for example, the telecom industry and the pharmaceutical industry are doing very good. This irregular variation has created a good peak for them. But there are other organizations, which is the hotel industry, the restaurant industry, have seen a bad peak. They have gone down. So this is the third reason why you will see fluctuations in your demand. And the last is, what trend is this data following? If there is an increasing trend in the product that you are using or you are creating, then there will on an average be an increase in everything. If your product is not good, then there will be a decreasing trend. And these are the 4 reasons why you will see fluctuations in your demand. So when I say 120 per year, it does not mean that an exactly 10 per month. There might be months where there will only be 2, where there might be months where there might be 18 weddings. And now this is the plan that we have to make. This 120 will be divided over the 12 months in an erratic manner. What you have to do is, you have to bring all the parts together and then create an aggregate plan. You have to create a plan for all those parts, where in some parts the demand is high and in some parts the demand is low. And that is what you mean by aggregate planning. Now again, in the 2008 and the 2012 syllabus, there were quite a few questions on aggregate planning. In the 2016 syllabus, they removed a lot of questions and they've just kept one. Now what happens is, when you do different kinds of questions, it gives you a better idea of the understanding. But then I don't want to do different kinds of questions, because there's just one question. It's not very difficult to understand, and that is why I'm directly going to dive into the question. If you are a production manager, when you are creating an aggregate plan, you are given certain liberties. And what are the liberties? Remember, I said that some month you might have 10 weddings, some month you might have only 5 weddings, while some month you might have 15 weddings. Now see, as my problem is, as a production manager, I have a certain number of machines and they will work. Now you can't tell me that in this month only make 10 units and in the next month make 5 units. That is so stupid. What do? I will shut down the machines. I will fire the workers. What will I do? But then again, in the third month, you are going to tell me I need 15 units. Hello. My standard is 10 units. That is all I can output. If you suddenly ask me for 5 more, I can't give you the 5 more. So the basic problem with production is a fluctuating demand. Sometimes I have to reduce production, while sometimes I have to increase production. And that is exactly what we are going to do in aggregate planning. We are going to see, or we are going to check, when is it that we need to increase production and when is it that we need to decrease production. Now, whenever I give you the liberty to increase or decrease production, you are allowed to do a few things, and a few things you are not allowed to do. Option number 1. Option number 1 is, if you need to produce more, I am giving you the liberty to hire more manpower, to rent more machines. But sir, what if I need to decrease production? Well, if you need to decrease production, and if I am giving you an option to hire, along with that, I can give you the option to fire. And this is done in a lot of plants. Now, I don't know how good you are at noticing things, but if you've left home from really early in the morning, you will see these day laborers sitting on the road on one side. So you will see a lot of day laborers sitting on one side, where there is this one human resource manager who comes in and who basically tells them, oh, today I need 100 people. Who 100 are ready to work? This is the salary for today. Those 100 come, they work, they go home, done. There are no contracts signed, there is nothing that is done. The next day, if I want more people, I come back. If I want less people, I tell the current working lot to take the day off without any salary. And that is the liberty of hiring and firing. If I want to increase production, I will hire. If I want to decrease production, I will fire. Both come with their own costs. Hiring extra people will come with a cost, and firing people will also come with a cost. Now, sir, what do you mean by firing people? Well, if this month I hire a certain number of people and next month I want to fire them, I can't just tell them go. I have to compensate them with something. With, if not the actual salary, something, which is what is happening right now. People who are working in a certain industry that is completely shut down, they are not technically being fired, but then they've been laid off for a certain amount of time because the owner also doesn't have a choice. There is no inflow of cash, there is only outflow. So what the owners are doing is they are paying a certain value to these people that are fired. So when there is a demand, I will call them back. But for this period, I'm not going to pay you the entire salary. I'm going to pay you a certain part of your salary. So if as a production manager, I have the liberty to hire people, I have the liberty to fire people also. And there will always be two sides to a coin. If you give me the liberty to hire, I should have the liberty to fire. Number two, the second option that is given to me is I can have a choice of increasing production. How? Well, ask them to work overtime. Ask them to work overtime and increase your production. So usually how do you work? Well, I have people from 10 to 5, that's it. Fine then, so whatever extra, ask them to do an overtime and increase your production. Well, if you give me an option of increasing production, you should give me an option of decreasing production also. And the third and the last is, I will give you an option of carrying inventory. Now, what do you mean by carrying inventory? Notice here, first month the demand was 10. So I am standard at 10. I produce 10, I sell 10, I finish it off. Now next month I have a demand of only 5. But you know what I will do? I will produce 10. But sir, you will only sell 5. I agree. The rest of the 5 will go into a inventory, will go into a go down, will go into a storage facility. And in the next period, whenever I want extra, I will pull it out of that. But if you are giving me an option of carrying inventory, what if this was reverse? 10, 15 and then 5. So I produced 10, I sold 10. I produced 10. But what was the demand for? The demand was for 15 units. I am 5 units short. Well, then in that case, I will also give you an option of carrying a backlog. What do you mean by a backlog? You tell the person, or you tell the person who's ordered from you that, I'm sorry, this month I won't be able to give it to you. In the next month, if the demand is low, I will produce whatever you require extra and I give it to you. But in this month, I will have to carry a backlog of 5 units, which might be fulfilled in the next period. Yes. And these are the 3 pure strategies. What do you mean by a pure strategy? If I tell you hiring is allowed, then firing is allowed. If I tell you increasing production is allowed, then decreasing production is allowed. If I tell you that carrying inventory is allowed, then having a backlog is also allowed. But to increase production, you hire people. And now if you want to decrease production, You say, I'm not going to decrease, I'm maintaining the same and I'm carrying an inventory. Not allowed. You are mixing two strategies. I can't give you so many liberties. I give you a liberty of hiring people and firing people. I give you a liberty of increasing production and decreasing production. I give you a liberty of carrying inventory and carrying backlog. Choose one of the three. You cannot choose and mix the two together. You can't say that this month I don't require people, so I am firing them. And in next month, I require more, so I am going to create an inventory and pick it up from that. No, sorry. You will not be allowed to mix two strategies or three strategies. Stick to one. Hire when you need to increase, fire when you need to decrease, increase production, which is hire more machines if you want to, and then give them back when you want to decrease production. Increase when you have extra value, you put it into an inventory, and whenever there is a backlog, you pull it out of that inventory. And these are three pure strategies. Let's come to the only one question where we look at what options are given to us and accordingly we create our own aggregate plan. So let's come to the question that we are going to do. Aggregate planning, question number 11 according to me. I have pulled it out of somewhere. You can keep it separately. You can write it as question number 1. Module page 34, question number 11. Fine. What are we doing? Well, ABC Corporation has developed a forecast for a group of items in the following demand pattern. So this is the quarter. So they've done quarterly. They've done 8 quarters. 4 quarters is a year. 8 quarters will be 2 years. So they've done 8 quarters. The demand goes from 270 right up till 370. So in the first quarter, the demand is 270. Next quarter, it dips. Third quarter, it goes up. Fourth quarter, it goes up. Fifth quarter, it dips. Sixth quarter, it dips. Seventh quarter, it dips. And eighth quarter, it again goes up. They've given you something called as a cumulative demand. If you ask me, not really required. And even if I want to find a cumulative demand, I can cumulate. You don't need to give it to me. So according to me, frankly and technically, this is all that is required. Okay, fine then. What do you want me to do? So the demand is a little erratic. Sometimes it increases, sometimes it decreases. Okay, what is it that you want me to do in this question? Well, what I want you to do is, the firm estimates that at rupees 150 per unit to increase production. So if you want to increase production, you have to pay 150 per unit. Okay. And 200 per unit to decrease production. So if you notice, increasing production is cheaper, decreasing production is a little more expensive. Fine. Then it costs rupees 5 per unit per quarter to carry the items in an inventory. So you take how much? You take 50 rupees per unit per quarter to carry the item in the inventory. Okay, so I am allowed to carry an inventory. And rupees 100 per unit if subcontracted. So if I am going to subcontract, then I am going to pay rupees 100 per unit. Okay, the question is, compare the cost of pure strategies. Fine. You are telling me to do this in pure strategies and then compare the costs. Let's understand what the pure strategies are in this question. Okay. A firm estimates that it costs 1 rupee per unit to increase production. So if you notice strategy number 1, you are letting me increase production by rupees 150 per unit per quarter. Okay. But then you are letting me decrease production also by how much? By rupees 200 per unit. Obviously, I told you, if you are allowed to increase production, you are allowed to decrease production. That is one pure strategy. What is the other strategy? Well, the other strategy is at rupees 50 per quarter to carry inventory. Okay, so you are letting me carry inventory at rupees 50 per unit per quarter, which means if I make extra, that goes into the inventory. But I told you, if inventory is allowed, then backlog should also be allowed. Is there a backlog allowed? They've not said about a backlog. So they didn't tell. They told you that if you produce extra, I will put it into an inventory. But what if I produce less than required? Well, then the demand will not be fulfilled. You haven't told me what do I do about backlogs. Fine. So ideally, like I told you, they haven't put a lot of questions where we understand every level. Technically, in this question, what you should have been given is, you should have been given an inventory carrying cost. And if you are giving an inventory carrying cost, you should have given a backlog cost. Let's assume that a backlog is given to us. So I am allowed to either carry an inventory or incur a backlog. And what is the third strategy? The third strategy is to subcontract. Well, what do you mean by subcontract? Well, subcontracting is basically because I cannot produce, you ask somebody to do it. So subcontract works when you are increasing production. When you want to increase production, you subcontract. What if I want to decrease production? Not available. Subcontracting is one strategy where it does not have a flip side. Increasing production gives an option of decreasing production. Carrying an inventory gives you a choice of backlogs. Subcontracting is one strategy that does not have a counter. So subcontract when you need more. What if you need less? Then I don't know what to do. I will tell you what to do. So here technically they should have given you a backlog cost. Now because they haven't given you a backlog cost, the problem is that I don't know how to deal with this strategy. Well, that's okay. These are the three pure strategies. I am going to evaluate one strategy at a time, and I am going to evaluate the costing of every strategy and then find out which strategy is a better strategy. Let's come to the first pure strategy. What if I want to increase and decrease production? Well, if you increase production, I'll charge you at 150. If you decrease production, I will charge you at 200. Okay, then let's start dealing with the first strategy, and that is increasing and decreasing of production. Fine. Let me get the question ready so that we don't waste time. So, quarter and the demand in that quarter. Let me write down what the demands are. So, depending on how many units do I require, I need to check whether I am going to require to increase my production or I am going to require to decrease my production. So, there will be two columns. One is an increase in production and the other is a decrease in production. In the first quarter, how many units do you require? 270. Is it more than the previous or less? Because if the previous is, let's say, you have been producing 300 units in that quarter, so everything is standard at 300 units. So then you need to decrease production by 30 units. Or if you were producing 200 in the previous quarter, you need 270 now. So you need to increase production by 70 units. But sir, I am not told how much I was producing in the previous quarter. And that is why, because the first quarter has no comparison whether 270 is an increase or a decrease, we put a dash and a dash. And we start comparing from the second period. Because for a comparison, I need to know what the previous was. If I don't know what the previous was, how will I know whether the given is an increase or a decrease? Now I can start comparing. 220 is an increase or a decrease? Well, 220 is a decrease from the previous. In the first quarter, I was producing, or I had set everything up to produce 270 units in a quarter. Now, if in the next quarter you only need 220, I need to decrease production by 50 units. Let's go to the next one, which is quarter number 3. How many units do you require in that quarter? 470 units. If you require 470 units, is it more or less? Well, sir, but I have a question. What am I comparing against? I'm comparing against 270 or 220? Or obviously 220, because the first quarter you were producing 270. So in the next quarter you reduced and now you are producing 220. So if you want to increase or decrease, you will check over the 270, because right now what I have standard is, I have standard 220. So 220 to 470 is an increase. How much is it an increase by? Well, it is 470 minus 220 and the answer is 250. So it is going to be an increased production by 250 units. Well, from 470, 670, is it an increase or a decrease? Well, it is a increase. Increase by how much? An increase by 200 units. 670 to 450, is it an increase or a decrease? Well, it's going to be a decrease. A decrease by how much? A decrease by 0 to 2. A decrease by 220 units. 670 minus 450, 670 minus 450, 220, 270 is an increase or a decrease? Well, 270 is a decrease over 450. How much is it a decrease by? Let's check. 450 minus 270 is a decrease of 180 units. 270 to 200, well, it's a decrease. A decrease by how many units? A decrease by 70 units. And lastly, 200 to 370, is it an increase or a decrease? Well, it is an increase by 170 units. So, I had to decrease production 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And I had to increase production 1, 2, 3 times. Let me take a total. So I am going to say the total increase in production is 250 plus 200 plus 170 is, you have done a total increase by 620 units and a total decrease of 50 plus 220 plus 180 plus 70 is a decrease of 520 units. So an increase of 620 and a decrease of 520 units. Let me now check what the costs are. Well, it was going to cost you what? 150 units to increase production and 200 to decrease. So I am going to say cost of increase production is rupees 150 into how many have I totally increased by? 620, which will become 620 into 150 is a total of 93,000 rupees, and cost of decrease production is rupees 200 for decrease into I am decreasing by 520 units. So it is going to be 200 into 520 is 104,000. So it is roughly 1,04,000 rupees. So total cost of this strategy is rupees 93,000 plus 1,04,000 is 1,97,000 rupees. And that is the answer for the first strategy, and that is increase and decrease in production. Let me unzoom a little so that you can see everything in one page. Perfect. So the demand, wherever there is the first period you cannot compare. From the next period onwards, start checking with the previous period. What had you standarded for the previous period, and for this period, will you have to increase or decrease production? Accordingly, find out the total and then the total. Multiply the total units increased by the increased cost. Multiply the total units decreased by the decreased cost, and that's your answer. Let's come to the institute solution. The institute has done all the cost calculations in one. Meaning, so what the institute has done is, in the same table, they've calculated the cost together and they've taken a total on the right hand side. So for the first year, there is no comparing. For the second year, there is a decrease of 50 into 200 is 10,000, and they've written the total as 10,000. Then in the third period, there is an increase by 250. 250 into 150 is 375,000. And then at the end, they have taken a total of the total, which is 197,000. What have I done? What I have done is, I have separately calculated the total increase, separately calculated the total decrease, and then the total is being multiplied by the costs. Up to you. Either way, the presentation remains the same. I find this more understanding. I do this. That is too much calculation at every step. Instead, I do the increase in production, decrease in production, and then calculate the cost and then do the total. And this is the cost of the first pure strategy. If I am allowed to increase production, I should be allowed to decrease production. We come to the next strategy, and that is, I should be allowed to carry inventory. But if I'm allowed to carry inventory, I should be allowed to carry backlog. And because this question is one level up, I'm going to tell you, assume that the backlog cost is 100 rupees per unit. So if you create more, put it into the inventory or put it into the storage room and then use it later. But if you are short of production, every unit you are short of production, I am going to charge you 100 rupees. Why 100 rupees? If you are short of production, the product has not reached the customer. The customer is unhappy. This is going on my goodwill. Or if I am making and I am producing myself, if I am selling myself, if I am producing and I am selling myself, if somebody comes for the product, I am not able to give them the product, then that customer might go to somebody else. Isn't that a loss indirectly also? So anything you make extra, I am going to put it into the inventory, and everybody knows whenever something goes into the storage room, it is going to cost me to maintain that product in the storage room. It's going to stay there for 1 quarter. So for 1 quarter, I need to make sure that no matter what the climate is, it stays dry. If it is a perishable product, if it is a food product, if it is a canned vegetable, or if it is a canned fruit, I need to take extra care of that product. If it is cement, or if it is, let's say, iron rods or steel rods, I need to make sure that they don't get wet, because if cement or iron gets wet, cement will come together and become one stone, while iron on the other hand will start rusting. So to keep them under maintenance, it is going to cost me 50 per unit. And if I am short of a unit, then I will be charged 100 rupees per unit. Now this is my assumption. How do you do this question? Well, increase and decrease production doesn't really need rocket science. You don't need to do any pre-planning. Want to increase production, increase it, this is what it's going to cost. Decrease production, decrease it, this is what it's going to cost. That's it. When you start with inventory, you have to do a little bit of a pre-calculation. And what is the pre-calculation? Whenever we decide to use the strategy, and that is carrying inventory and allowed backlogs. So if I want to increase, if I am producing more than required, then I should be allowed to carry inventory. If I am producing less than required, then I should be allowed to carry a backlog. When that strategy is given. So in the inventory strategy, we set production at a standard, that is the average production. So whenever you are allowed to carry inventory and carry backlogs, what you are going to do is you are going to set your production at a standard, and that standard is the average production. What do you mean by average production? Take a total of your demand in the 8 quarters, and the total of the demand in the 8 quarters is going to be 270 plus 220 plus 470 plus 670 plus 450 plus 270 plus 200 plus 370. The total is 2920. This 2920 is for 8 periods. So divide that by 8 and the answer is 365. So what I am going to do? I am going to set production at a standard of 365 units per quarter. But sir, what is the guarantee that my demand is 365 units per quarter? There is no guarantee. But we are going to set it at 365. How will that work? Well, let's come to the solution. Let me get the table ready and then I will continue. So, quarter 1 to 8 and my demand 270, 220, 470 and so on. Now, these are my demands. But what have I set my standard at? My standard production level is 365 units. So, production level. No matter what you want, I have set my standard at 365. I am not going to produce more. I am not going to produce less. How will that help? I'll tell you. Now what will happen? In a certain period, there will be a certain demand. Like for example, the demand is 270. How much are you producing? 365. Are you producing more than required or less than required? Obviously, I am producing more. I am producing a lot more than required. So whatever extra you are producing will go into an inventory. But sir, there is a certain period where what I require is 670 and I am only producing 365. Which means in that period, I am going to be short of products to give. Well, in that case, we don't have a choice. We are going to incur a backlog. So remember there, increased production would cost 150, decrease would cost 200. Here, anything I carry in the inventory will cost me 50 rupees, and if I have to incur a backlog, will cost me 100 rupees. Let's begin then. First period, demand is 270. How much are you producing? 365. Is it more than required or less than required? Definitely more than what is required. How much more? Well, it is 365 minus 270 is 95 units more. Then these 95 will go into an inventory. Is that clear? I hope everybody has understood this, because from the next period onwards, a little calculation will change. So let me do a quick recap and then I'll continue to the next. What are we going to do? Whenever inventory carrying question is given to you, you will always and always set your production at a standard of your average, which is 365. Now, in a certain period, if you are producing more than required, you will start creating an inventory. And in a certain period, if you are producing less than required, then that will go as a backlog. Okay. The next quarter has come, which is the second quarter. How much will you produce in the second quarter? 365 units you will produce. But are there 95 units pending in the storeroom? Yes. So how many units do you have in total? Well, the 365 that I produced plus the 95 that are there in the storage. So the total units that you have on you in the second quarter is 460. But what is the demand of that quarter? Well, that quarter is only demanding 220 units. Well, then subtract the 220. So if you give away 220, you are still left with 240 units. This 240 will again go into the inventory. I'll quickly repeat this and then I'll go fast. You have set your production at 365. You want 270, which means you produce 95 extra. Let them go and sit in the storeroom. In the next period, you are going to produce 365 because that is the standard. To that, add the 95 that is there in the inventory. 365 plus the 95 is a total of 460. But out of this 460, you only require 220 units. So what is left with you is 240 units. They again go into the inventory. Let's come to the next period. You will again produce 365 units. But there are 240 units in the inventory. So the 365 that you produce plus the 240 in the inventory is 605 units. These 605 units are what you have with you. But out of them, the demand is of only 470. So when you give away 470, which is the demanded, you are still left with 135 units. In the next period, well, in the next period, what we are going to do is, I am again going to produce 365 units. The 365 units plus the 135 in my storeroom. So the 365 plus the 135 in my storeroom is a total of 500 units. How much do you require? Well, what I require is 670. Well then, my friend, you are short. How much are you short by? 500 minus the demand is 650. So I am short of 170 units, or there is a backlog of 170 units. Well, let's continue. Now what will happen? Can I say in other words, a backlog will be basically a negative demand? So this is what I'm going to do in the next period. I'm going to say, I am going to produce 365. But out of this 365, 170 is previous period's backlog that I have to fulfill. So from the 365, you remove the previous period's backlog, which is 170. How much are you left with you? 195. So after paying off the previous period's backlog, I have only 195 units left. What is the demand of that period? The demand of that period is 450 units. Remove 450 from it. This period, you are still short of a 255 units. In the next period, you are going to produce 365, but the previous period backlog is only 225. So from the 365, remove the 255, which is the previous period's backlog. You are only left with 110 units. What is the demand for that period? Well, the demand for that period is 270 units. So from the 110, if I have to fulfill a demand of 270, I am still going to be short of 160 units. In the next period, I will produce 365 units. Well, when I produce 365 units, the previous period's backlog is 160 units. You are left with 205 units. What is the demand for that period? Well, the good thing is the demand for that period is only 200 units. If I give away the 200 units, I will be left with 5 units with me. There is no backlog. There is an inventory of 5 units. In the next period, I will produce 365 and the 5 from the previous period will add to this and become 370 units. You produce 365 plus the 5 is 370. You have 370. You wanted 370. There is not going to be an inventory. There is not going to be a backlog. And this is why you produce average. If you produce average at the end of your 8-quarter planning period, your backlogs and inventories will be 0. The new period, you can start fresh. Now, technically what I would ask you to do, I would write it down, but I don't want to waste place. So I'm not going to write it down, or let me write it down, but with a marker, with a sketch pen, so that we know that we are not going to include. How much inventory have you carried? Well, you have carried an inventory of 95 units plus 240 units plus 135 units plus 5 units is a total of 475. So you are carrying an inventory of 475 units, for which I'm going to charge you $50 per unit per quarter, is 23,750 rupees. Is the cost of carrying inventory. Well, cost of backlog was 100 rupees. How much backlog are you carrying? 170 plus 255 plus 160 was the total backlog carried, which is 585 units of backlog. Well, with 585 units of backlog, what is going to happen is, I am going to charge you 100 rupees for this unsatisfied demand, and this is going to be 58500 or 58,500. 58,500 plus the 23,750 rupees of inventory is a total of 82,250 rupees. And this is what this strategy is going to cost you. But sir, I agree with you everywhere. There's just one problem. We are not allowed to carry backlogs. This we assumed. So I hope you've understood what happens when you are told to carry backlogs. This is what you do. You decide your average production, stick to that. If you've produced more, let it go into the inventory. If you've produced less, incur a backlog. Add the total inventory, add the total backlog, and multiply it by the inventory cost and the backlog cost, and that's going to be your total answer. But because in the question a backlog is not given, it means that backlogs are not allowed. But sir, how is that possible? How is it possible that backlogs are not allowed? Well, backlogs are not allowed. What do you do when backlogs are not allowed? When backlogs are not allowed, you pick up your most negative backlog. Which means you will have to do this? Yes. You will pick up your most negative backlog. So let me make a new table and then include the backlog as an inventory only. Because as it is, we are not going to consider backlogs. So let me quickly draw a new table. Let me do this now, but fast, where I'm not going to write down a backlog. My backlog is going to be a negative inventory because I am, as it is, not allowed to keep backlogs. So period number 1, I have a demand of 270, but I'm producing 365. So am I producing more or less? More. How much more? 95 units. Period number 2, I'm producing 365 plus the 95, which is the previous period's inventory, is 460. But I only need 220. So I am extra, I am 240 units extra. Next period. 365 is what I am producing plus the 240, which is the period here, previous period's backlog. Previous period's inventory. Total becomes 605. But I only need 470. So when you give away 470, you are left with 135 units. Next period, the 135, which is the previous period's, it will become the opening balance here, plus the 365 that I produce is a total of 500 units. I have produced a total of 500, or I produced 365 plus the backlog is a total of 500, from which I only require 670, or rather I require 670. Then can I say 500 minus 670, I am short of 170 units. So I'm not creating a new column for backlog, I'm writing the backlog in the inventory itself. In the next period, 675, and the previous period's backlog has to be removed from it. I am left with 195 units, but my demand is of 450, so I am short. How much am I short of? 255. In the next period, 365 minus the 255, which means only 110 units left for this quarter's demand. This quarter's demand is 270. When I give away 270, I am still short of 160 units. 365 minus the 160, 205 left, but my demand is 200, which means I am an extra of 5 units. 365 plus the 5 is 370, 370 is 0. And this is my inventory clocking. Now once I have how the inventory is done, I realize that I'm not allowed to carry a backlog, which is a negative inventory. So what I'm going to do in this is, I'm going to pick up the most negative backlog. What am I going to do? Pick up the most negative backlog. Produce it at the beginning. See, this plan I'm making before the 8 quarters. No. This I'm creating a plan for the upcoming 8 quarters. So the 8 quarters have not started yet. So I am going to pick up the most negative backlog and produce the 255 and keep it with me right from the beginning. How will that help? I will tell you. What you are going to do is, you are going to produce the 255 and keep with you. And this is going to be your new inventory. So, period number 1. You are going to produce 365? Yes. So, 365 plus, haven't you already produced and kept 255 for God knows what reason? The 255. is a total of 620 units. But what is your demand? Well, my demand is 270. So if from the 620 you give away 270, you are left with 350 units. So you have 350 extra. So you've created an inventory of 350 units. In the next period, the 365 that you are going to produce plus the 350 in the inventory. So the 350 in the inventory plus the 365 that you are going to produce, you have a total of 715 units. But how much do you require? I only require 220. Remove the 220 from it. You are left with 495. You are left with 495 units. The 495 that I already have plus the 365 that I will produce will be a total of 860 units with me. But how much is my demand in that period? 470. Give away 470 from it. You are left with 390 units still with you. Again, in the next period, I produce 365 along with the previous period's backlog. So plus 365 is a total of 755 units with me. 755 is what I have. What I require is only 670. Remove the 670 from it and I am left with 85 units still with me. 85 units is what I have produced. 85 units is what I have remaining with me. And I am going to produce 365. So 365 plus 85 is another 450 units. 450 units is what I have. 450 is what I want. The inventory becomes 0. Do you realize that at the most negative inventory, there is no, at the most negative backlog, there is no backlog left. So I have successfully achieved creating only and only a inventory and not a backlog. But sir, what about the further? Check yourself. No? What you require, what you produce is 365. What you require is 270. There is no backlog. So you produce 365 plus 0 is 365 minus the 270. So 365 minus the 270, you have an extra of 95 units. Yes. The 365 that you produce along with the 95 from the previous period is a total of 560 units. 460 units, sorry. How much do you require? I only require 200. Fine then. Remove 200 from it and you are left with 260 units. The 260 that you have in the inventory plus the 365 that you will produce in this period is 625. But how much do you require? 370. Remove the 370 from it and you are left with a 255. And obviously I was going to be left with a 255 because wasn't the 255 that I produced and kept initially, wasn't it more than what I required? And that is why you will see a 255 in the final inventory. And this is how you create a strategy where you are not incurring any backlogs anymore. You are only incurring inventories. And this is called an adjusted inventory. You know what? You didn't have to again do this. All you had to do is add the 255 to every value and you would have gotten this. 95 plus 255 is 350. 240 plus 255 is 495. 130 plus 255 is 390. Negative 170 plus 255 is going to be 85 and so on. Now you calculate what the total inventory is. Question. Where will I consider the 255? Twice? No. Either consider it here or consider it here because this is at the end of 8 quarters. So this 255 is not 8th quarter's problem. It is the 9th quarter's problem. It will be carried in the 9th quarter. So either consider it here or consider it here. Don't consider it twice. What is the total inventory that we've carried? The total inventory carried is 350 plus 495 plus 390 plus 85 plus 95 plus 260 plus 255, and the answer is 1930. You carried a total of 1930 units in your inventory. I am charging you 50 rupees per unit per quarter. You owe me 96,500 rupees for the inventory carrying strategy. Quick recap: if they tell you to carry inventory, they have to let you to carry backlogs. Create an inventory column, a backlog column. Write the inventory here, write the backlog here. To always produce average so that the total inventory and the backlog at the end of all the 8 periods becomes 0 and 0. Calculate the total inventory, the total backlog, multiply by the inventory and the backlog charges, and that's your answer. But what if only inventory is allowed, backlog is not allowed? Well, if only inventory is allowed and backlog is not allowed, what I'm going to do is only write my inventory as well as backlogs in the inventory column only. Pick up the most negative inventory, adjust all the inventories by adding the most negative. You will realize that at the end of 8 quarters, you are left with 255, and there was never in any period that you were short. Add the total inventory, and that is your answer, 6750, which is 1930 into 50. Let's look at what the institute material has done. According to me, these are all the 5 columns that are required. The institute material has drawn too many columns. I don't know why. Let's go ahead and check. So, they have done a demand, then they've done a cumulative demand, then they have done a cumulative demand for God knows why. I think demand is more than enough. Production level, yes. 2920 divided by 8, which is 365. So what I wrote is quarter demand and then production level. Then they did cumulative production level. I don't know why these cumulative columns are written. I have no idea. Now you start adjusting inventory. So this is your adjustment. You notice there is below also the total inventory becomes 0. So you pick up the most negative inventory and then add it to all the inventories by creating an adjustment. And then what they've done is there only they've multiplied by 50 and written and then taken a total. What I have done is I have directly taken a total and then multiplied it by 50. Anyway, the answer is going to be the same, 96500. And this is the second strategy, and that is carrying inventory and backlogs, but backlogs were not allowed here. So we only carried inventory and we made sure we never require backlogs. Let's come to the third and the last and the easiest strategy. And that strategy is subcontracting. What did they say? Well, what they said is that subcontract at rupees 100 per unit. And this is the most easiest strategy and the best. I will tell you why. What do you mean by subcontract? Well, what I mean by subcontract is that whenever you need extra, you ask somebody else to give it to you. Subcontract. But what if I make extra? There is no option there. Then don't produce extra. How? Do one thing. What is your most minimum demand? Well, my most minimum demand is 200 units. Then you produce only 200 units. Anything extra that you require, get it subcontracted. Because you are producing the minimum, it will never happen that you require less than 200. You will always require 200 or more. Whatever more you require, get it subcontracted. Let me quickly draw the table. So subcontracting is a strategy that does not have a counter to it. So if you need extra, you subcontract. What if you need less? Then make sure you never need less, no? So in subcontracting, now make sure you write this above the table. We produce the minimum demand. Anything extra will be subcontracted. Well, let's begin then. What is your production level? Minimum. What is the minimum? 200. Then I will produce 200 units throughout. What if I require extra? Well, I'll subcontract them. What if I require less? Well, you never require less because I am producing the least. Here I am going to subcontract 70 units because I need 70 more. Here 20 units. Here I am going to subcontract 270 units. Here I am going to subcontract 470 units. Here I am going to subcontract 250 units. Here I am going to subcontract 70 units. Here I don't have to subcontract because I am producing exactly to meet demand. And here I am going to subcontract 170 units. What is the total that I have subcontracted? 70 plus 20 plus 270 plus 470 plus 250 plus 70 plus 170 is a total of 1320 units subcontracted. Cost of subcontracting. What are you charging me for subcontracting? Well, for subcontracting, you are charging me 100 rupees per unit. I have subcontracted a total of 1320 units into 100, which is going to be 132,000, which is basically 1,32,000 rupees. The first strategy gave me a cost of 1,97,000. The second strategy gave me a cost of 96,500. The third strategy gave me a cost of 132. So the best strategy right now is this strategy of carrying inventory, which is 96,500. So let's look at this part of the solution. Well, this part of the solution says that here normal production capacity is assumed to be 200, minimum of the demand value. In addition, whatever we need, we subcontract. They've written the answer here also, which is very stupid. They should come below the table. Anyway, quarter 1 to 8 forecast written what you are going to subcontract, and they've written the subcontracting cost there only and then taking a total. I've taken a total and then multiplied by 100. At the end of it, they are comparing three strategies. In the three strategies, which is the best? The total cost of pure strategies is given. It is observed that plan 2, changing inventory levels, has the least cost. So given a choice, I am going to change inventory. That's it. Whatever they have written is written very well. But I think there are a few parts in the table that are not required. Like for example, instead of doing a total here, take a total and then multiply. That's better. Even here in the inventory, the cumulatives are not really required. If you have your understanding in place, without the cumulative, you can finish off the question. That is aggregate planning. Now, like as usual, there is just one question, that's it. They have not put any other question from aggregate planning, unfortunately. So as usual, we have to find out how many times has this been asked. So because I don't want to waste time, I'm going to tell you this directly. Aggregate planning till date has never been asked. They've just kept one question in aggregate planning. If you ask me, it's a very beautiful concept. They should have kept it, but they haven't, unfortunately. And till date, like technically, before you all write the paper, there should have been a June 20 exam that should have been done. Unfortunately, it is not done. So there is no paper to analyze there. So yeah, so concept number 3, and that is aggregate planning. Now, aggregate planning has never ever been asked. Location and facility planning has been asked once, and that too facility planning was asked. Location planning hasn't been asked. So this is it. With this, we cover up the third concept, or rather the fourth concept, which is forecasting, location, facility, and then aggregate planning. I will see you with the next concept. Thank you.